In the vast skies over Europe, the tide of aerial warfare was fundamentally altered not just by tactics or aircraft designs, but by a secret weapon hidden in every drop of fuel: octane. While octane ratings are capped at 100, measuring a fuel's resistance to knocking, what truly mattered was the performance number, which could soar to 150, indicating a fuel capable of withstanding 50% more compression than pure iso-octane. Achieving such high-performance fuels involved complex chemical blends, including tetraethyl lead and aromatic hydrocarbons like toluene, meticulously engineered by scientists working behind the scenes. In 1943, British and American chemists, through rigorous experimentation, produced experimental batches of grade 150, a name that betrayed the reality of a performance rating, not an octane number, dyed purple for quick identification. These fuels shattered previous limits. Merlin engines, operating on this high-octane blend, could sustain manifold pressures of 75 inches of mercury, an extraordinary feat, pushing aircraft speeds past 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, with gains of over 10 miles per hour compared to standard fuels. This chemical breakthrough was a game-changer, enabling fighters like the Mustang to operate at power levels once thought unsafe, and transforming the very limits of what aircraft could do. But it wasn't just about raw speed, it was about unleashing the full potential of the aircraft's engine, allowing a P-51 Mustang, powered by this advanced fuel, to roar at speeds nearing 448 miles per hour. Speed that German fighters like the Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109G could only dream of matching. The key was high-octane fuel's resistance to knocking, which permitted higher compression ratios and more power without engine damage. To handle this, ground crews faced the toxic challenge of managing lead-laden fuels, requiring special procedures, safety measures, and more frequent engine maintenance, yet the performance gains far outweighed these hurdles. This technological edge was a strategic advantage. It allowed American and British fighters to press their tactical benefits, higher speeds, better climb rates, and extended operational ceilings, while German aircraft, limited to their lower-octane synthetic fuels, like the modest 91-octane B4 or the C3 grades, lagged behind. German fighters such as the Bf-109G, barely reaching around 400 miles per hour, found themselves outclassed by the enhanced Mustangs powered on the new fuel. Initially, German pilots could attempt to engage under favorable conditions, but as the Allies adopted the high-performance fuel widely, the speed gap widened, creating an insurmountable imbalance that no tactic or skill could offset. This fuel revolution was rooted in long-term peacetime research, meticulous scientific efforts to understand how octane ratings correlate with engine power and efficiency. Increasing octane allowed engines to operate at higher compression ratios, producing more horsepower and enabling aircraft to reach higher altitudes faster, crucial in dogfights and intercept missions. The development of high-octane aviation gasoline involved overcoming enormous refining challenges, requiring innovations like catalytic cracking, perfected by engineers like Eugene Hudry, which allowed for large-scale production of consistent, reliable fuel. By 1944, Allied refineries churned out millions of gallons each month, far surpassing Germany's sluggish synthetic fuel plants, which relied on coal-based methods like Burgius, slow and resource-intensive. This superior fuel was more than just a technical marvel. It became a symbol of Allied industrial and scientific might. Dyed purple, it marked the transformation of ordinary fighters into extraordinary machines. Pilots learned to push their engines to higher boost limits, exercising new caution at lower altitudes to prevent engine damage, but reveling in the increased speed and agility that came with the improved fuel. Strategic missions. Whether escorting bombers deep into Germany, intercepting V-1 flying bombs, or engaging Luftwaffe fighters, became more effective, thanks to this unseen, yet decisive, advantage. Throughout 1944 and into 1945, the deployment of the Grade 150 fuel, carefully rationed and distributed, enabled the Allies to dominate the skies. American fighter groups claimed over 4,900 enemy aircraft shot down, with victory margins widening as German fighters, hampered by fuel shortages, aging pilots, and limited resources, could no longer match the relentless pace and performance of their opponents. The enhanced fuel allowed aircraft like the Mustang to reach speeds nearing 448 miles per hour, an extraordinary feat that shattered previous limits and redefined aerial combat. German pilots, confronted with these superior fighters powered by high-octane fuels, found their tactical options dwindling. Their once formidable ability to outmaneuver or outrun the Allies was eroded as the speed and agility of American fighters grew beyond their expectations, thanks to the chemical innovation in their fuel. The psychological impact was profound. Luftwaffe commanders like Hermann Göring, in the early months of 1944, amidst the vast skies over Dayton, Ohio, an extraordinary moment unfolded that would forever alter the course of aerial combat. A test pilot, with unwavering focus and steady hand, gently manipulated the throttle of a P-51 Mustang, pushing the legendary aircraft beyond its established limits. This was no ordinary flight. It was a daring experiment, an attempt to unlock the full potential of an innovative fuel blend that had recently been developed. As he advanced the throttle, the engine roared fiercely, responding with increasing ferocity as the boost pressure surged past the standard war emergency power threshold. The gauge needle climbed rapidly, reaching a remarkable 75 inches of mercury, an extraordinary level of pressure made possible by a new, experimental aviation fuel simply labeled as Grade 150. This fuel, a chemically engineered marvel, fed the high-performance engine with a potency that was previously unimaginable. Meanwhile, the airspeed indicator's needle advanced swiftly, surpassing figures that had once been considered the upper limits of Allied fighter aircraft capabilities. At an altitude of 25,000 feet, the Mustang was accelerating at a breathtaking pace, an impressive 448 miles per hour. On the ground, the engineers monitoring the vital signs of this daring test exchanged tense, expectant glances. The radio crackled with the pilot's report, confirming what everyone suspected. This was no mere incremental step forward in performance. It was an outright revolution, cloaked in the vivid purple hue of the new aviation gasoline, a chemical breakthrough that offered a significant, perhaps decisive, advantage. This advancement in fuel chemistry threatened to upend the established assumptions that the Luftwaffe held about American fighter aircraft. The war in Europe, it seemed, was on the cusp of a profound transformation. Yet, what many did not realize at the time was that this revolutionary edge was not the product of a new aircraft design or tactical innovation, but rather the result of a remarkable chemical achievement. It was a fuel, an exotic blend of hydrocarbons, that enabled existing fighters to operate at levels that previously seemed out of reach, levels that challenged and ultimately would surpass German expectations. Unbeknownst to the Luftwaffe, American and British fuel chemists had been quietly working behind the scenes, making breakthroughs that the Third Reich's synthetic fuel program could only dream of matching. While German fighters struggled with their standard B4 fuel, rated at a modest 91 octane on the lean mixture scale, and their most advanced C3 fuel barely approached the equivalent of the Allied 75 to 80 octane fuel, the Allies had succeeded in producing aviation gasoline with an astonishing performance rating of 150. This development carried enormous consequences. For example, a P-51 Mustang powered by the traditional 130-octane fuel could reach approximately 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, the upper limits of its performance at the time. However, when refueled with the new grade 150 fuel, the same aircraft, piloted by the same skilled flyer and flying at the same altitude, could surpass speeds of 448 miles per hour. Such a margin of improvement was staggering, fundamentally altering the dynamics of air combat. German pilots, who had already come to respect the Mustang's formidable range and high-altitude prowess, were about to confront the startling reality that the Americans had fundamentally changed the game. The Luftwaffe's frontline fighters at that time included the Messerschmitt Bf 109G, which could reach a maximum speed of approximately 400 miles per hour at altitude, and the Focke-Wulf Fw 190A, capable of attaining about 408 miles per hour under optimal conditions. While these speeds were impressive, they were still inferior to the enhanced performance of the American Mustangs running on the new fuel. In tactical terms, German pilots could at least initially attempt to engage the Mustang under favorable conditions, knowing they might have the speed advantage. But once the Americans adopted the higher octane fuel and the performance gains became widespread, the Germans found themselves at a severe disadvantage, an imbalance that no amount of pilot skill, tactical ingenuity, or clever maneuvering could fully compensate for. The story of how such a remarkable fuel advantage came into being begins not with the chaos of war but with the meticulous, long-term efforts of petroleum chemists working during peacetime. These scientists understood that octane rating was a measure of how much an air-fuel mixture could be compressed before it ignited spontaneously, a phenomenon known as knocking. The higher the octane number, the greater the compression an engine could safely handle, resulting in more power output from each cycle of combustion. This scientific principle was straightforward. Increasing the octane rating allowed engines to operate at higher compression ratios, which translated into more power, faster aircraft, and higher operational ceilings. However, translating this knowledge into practical, industrial-scale production of high-octane aviation fuel was a complex, formidable challenge. The engineering hurdles were significant, requiring advanced refining techniques and sophisticated chemical processes to produce consistent, reliable fuel batches. In the early days of aviation, the fuel used was adequate primarily for commercial aircraft and the initial training planes employed by the military. However, as aircraft performance demands increased, especially in combat scenarios, this fuel quickly proved to be grossly inadequate. These early fuel formulations could not sustain the high compression ratios or deliver the necessary energy output needed for the more powerful and faster aircraft that were rapidly being developed. Faced with this challenge, the British, eager to gain any edge in their ongoing aerial conflicts, especially against the formidable Luftwaffe, sought to improve their aircraft performance through better fuel. Desperate for a technological advantage, they collaborated with American oil companies to develop a higher octane fuel, specifically, one that reached a 100-octane rating. This development was crucial and came just in time for the Battle of Britain, providing a significant performance boost. The impact of this advancement was immediately noticeable. British aircraft such as the Spitfire and the Hurricane, which previously struggled with speed and climb rate limitations at higher altitudes, suddenly gained a noticeable increase of around 30 to 40 miles per hour in maximum speed when operating on this 100-octane fuel. Moreover, their climb rates improved significantly, by approximately 500 to 1,000 feet per minute, allowing them to reach combat altitude more swiftly and effectively. For German pilots, who had been benefiting from their own high-performance fuel, ranging from 91 to 100 octane, the arrival of this superior British fuel-level playing field meant their aircraft no longer held a performance advantage over their adversaries. They found themselves on more equal footing, resetting the balance in aerial combat dynamics. Progress did not halt there. The development of even higher octane fuels, reaching a rating of 130, marked another leap forward in aviation technology. This advanced fuel, particularly effective when used with rich mixture settings, became the backbone of Allied air power throughout the year 1943. It powered some of the most iconic aircraft of the era: the Merlin engines in the legendary Spitfire and Mustang fighters, the Allison engines in the formidable P-38 Lightning, and the massive Pratt & Whitney R280,000 radial engines in the P-47 Thunderbolt. The rapid scaling of production was driven by the efforts of visionary aviation fuel advocate, General James Doolittle. A pioneering figure in military aviation, Doolittle had dedicated years in the 1930s to persuading both the military and oil industries of the importance of investing in high-octane fuel development. Under his leadership, the United States ramped up high-octane fuel production significantly. By 1943, 17 Allied refineries were producing vast quantities of high-octane aviation gasoline using the catalytic cracking process, a method perfected by Eugene Hudry, a French immigrant engineer. This process allowed for more efficient and higher-yield production of high-octane fuels, which were essential for sustaining the demands of wartime aviation. American refineries alone supplied millions of gallons of such advanced fuel each month. This plentiful supply was more than enough to power the enormous bomber fleets engaged in the relentless strategic bombing campaign against Germany, as well as the expanding fighter forces tasked with protecting these bombers. In stark contrast, German fuel production lagged behind due to their reliance on synthetic fuel derived from coal. The process used by Germany, known as the Bergius method, although technically sound, was cumbersome, slow and resource-intensive, limiting their output of high-octane aviation gasoline. As a result, German fighters predominantly flew on B4 fuel, rated at around 91 octane on the lean mixture scale. Their premium grade, known as C3, was mainly used in aircraft powered by BMW 801 engines, such as the Focke-Wulf FW-190s and select Messerschmitt variants, with a performance roughly equivalent to the Allied 130-octane fuel but available in far smaller quantities. By the year 1944, approximately two-thirds of German aviation fuel was C3 grade, but even this represented only a tiny fraction of the high-octane fuel available to the Allies. Understanding what octane ratings truly signify requires grasping a fundamental principle of internal combustion engines. Octane ratings measure a fuel's resistance to detonation, a phenomenon that can cause severe engine damage. During the compression stroke of an engine, the piston compresses the air-fuel mixture, causing a dramatic increase in temperature and pressure. If the fuel ignites prematurely, before the spark plug fires, that leads to detonation, which is an uncontrolled, explosive combustion. This shockwave can cause components within the engine to crack, warp, or even fail entirely. Higher octane fuels are characterized by their ability to withstand greater compression without igniting prematurely. This trait allows engines to operate at higher compression ratios, which directly translates into more power, better efficiency, and enhanced performance. Consequently, the development and utilization of high-octane fuel became a pivotal factor in the evolution of military aviation, dramatically enhancing aircraft capabilities and gaining a decisive advantage in aerial combat during certainly. Here is the deeply reworked and expanded version of the original text, crafted with an elegant, clear, and comprehensive narrative style, approximately 120 to 150% longer than the initial material. Octane ratings, by their very definition, are capped at a maximum value of 100 because this figure corresponds to the fuel's resistance to knocking, or detonation, that is equivalent to that of pure isooctane, which serves as the standard reference. These ratings serve as a benchmark to measure how well a fuel can withstand compression without igniting prematurely. Meanwhile, performance numbers go beyond this standard, offering a comparative measure of how much better a particular fuel performs in resisting knocking relative to pure isooctane. To illustrate, if a fuel is assigned a performance number of 150, this indicates that it can endure 50% more compression than pure isooctane before reaching the point of detonation. In other words, such a fuel possesses a significantly higher resistance to knocking, allowing engines to operate at greater compression ratios for enhanced power output. Achieving such elevated performance levels in fuel was not a trivial task. It involved the deliberate addition of specialized anti-knock compounds, most notably tetraethylene, and meticulous blending of aromatic hydrocarbons such as toluene and xylene with basic gasoline. The process was a sophisticated chemical balancing act, requiring precision to optimize both anti-knock properties and energy content while ensuring that manufacturing remained feasible on a practical scale. During the early 1940s, British fuel chemists working at the renowned Royal Aircraft Establishment conducted rigorous experiments, testing an array of fuel blends throughout the years of 1942 and 1943. Their goal was to identify the optimal mixture that would deliver superior anti-knock performance, high energy output, and straightforward production methods suitable for wartime needs. Simultaneously, American researchers based at Wright Field undertook parallel investigations into similar fuel formulations, often sharing their experimental data and insights with their British counterparts. By the early months of 1943, both nations had successfully produced experimental batches of a new type of fuel that they designated as 150 grade. However, the naming convention was somewhat misleading. It implied an octane rating of 150, which, chemically speaking, was impossible because octane ratings are inherently capped at 100. Instead, the name referred to a dual-scale system. The fuel possessed a performance number of 150 on the rich mixture scale, used to measure the fuel's resistance in more heavily fuel-rich mixtures, and maintained a standard octane rating of 100 on the lean mixture scale. This newly developed fuel was dyed purple for easy visual identification and underwent extensive testing throughout the year 1943. The results, in fact, exceeded all expectations. When engines, specifically Merlin engines, the workhorses of many Allied aircraft, operated on this 150 grade fuel, they demonstrated remarkable performance improvements. For example, Merlin engines running on this high-performance fuel could sustain manifold pressure readings of 75 inches of mercury, compared to only 67 inches when using the earlier 130 grade fuel. This increase in manifold pressure directly translated into a significant boost in horsepower, allowing aircraft to achieve higher speeds, better climb rates, and overall enhanced operational capabilities. To provide concrete examples, the Packard Merlin V16507 engine, which powered the iconic P-51 Mustang, normally produced about 1,490 horsepower when operating on the standard 130 grade fuel under military power settings. However, when fueled with the newly developed 150 grade fuel at war emergency power levels, the same engine could generate approximately 1,720 horsepower in the P-51B variant equipped with the V16503 Merlin engine. This substantial power increase, which brought output to roughly 1,600 horsepower, had an immediate and profound impact on aircraft performance. Flight testing at Wright Field further confirmed these laboratory findings, demonstrating that the performance gains were consistent and significant across all flight regimes. The maximum achievable speeds increased by roughly 25 to 30 miles per hour at high altitudes, and climb rates improved by several hundred feet per minute, sometimes well over 1,000 feet per minute more than before. Most importantly, these enhancements did not necessitate any modifications to the aircraft's design or structure. The same Mustang fighter flown on a day when it ran on 130 grade fuel could be flown again the next day using 150 grade fuel, with the only difference being the type of fuel flowing through its lines. The aircraft's operational capabilities were measurably improved simply because of the higher performance fuel it received. Given these promising results, the decision was made in early 1944 to introduce this advanced grade of fuel into operational service with fighter squadrons. The timing of this strategic move was carefully considered, aligning with the pressing needs of the ongoing conflict. The United States Army Air Force's 8th Air Force, based in England and tasked with conducting daylight strategic bombing raids deep into German territory, was suffering from mounting losses that threatened to undermine their operational effectiveness. Despite the arrival of the first during the course of World War II, air combat strategy often revolved around the crucial decision to either swiftly escape or stubbornly refuse to engage in battles when circumstances were unfavorable. By May of 1944, a significant technological advancement had begun to reshape aerial warfare on the Western Front with the arrival of the first operational shipments of a new grade of aviation fuel, known as the 150 grade, into England. These shipments marked a turning point in the Allied air effort, providing fighter aircraft with enhanced performance capabilities that could influence the outcome of critical missions. The distribution of this advanced fuel was a meticulously controlled process, carried out with strategic precision. Not every fighter unit immediately received supplies of the new fuel. Instead, the initial distribution was carefully managed to ensure optimal use and to assess its impact in combat situations. The United States Army Air Force's 8th Air Force, which was tasked with gaining and maintaining air superiority over occupied Europe and the approaching D-Day invasion zones, began by equipping select squadrons with the 150 grade fuel. This selective approach served two primary purposes: managing logistical supply chains more effectively and evaluating how the new fuel affected aircraft performance during real combat operations. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Royal Air Force, which had pioneered many of the early tests and evaluations of the new fuel, also began outfitting their fighter squadrons with this upgraded resource. The priority was clear. Units engaged in high-speed interception missions were at the forefront of this deployment. These missions included hunting German V-1 flying bombs, which had begun terrorizing London and southern England since June 1944. The V-1 was a formidable weapon, capable of flying at approximately 400 miles per hour at low altitudes, making it a daunting target for Allied fighters. Interception of these low-flying, fast-moving bombs demanded aircraft with exceptional speed and agility. Many of the existing fighters, such as the Hawker Tempest and the Spitfire Mark 14, struggled to catch the V-1s, as their performance at low altitude was limited by air density, which hampered engine power and aerodynamic efficiency. Standard fuel tanks in the Mustangs, for example, offered only marginal assistance in intercepting these fast targets, often leaving pilots with insufficient speed margins to close the gap reliably. However, when the P-51 Mustangs were fueled with the new 150 grade fuel, their performance improved significantly, providing them with the necessary speed margin to reliably intercept and destroy the V-1s. One notable event illustrating this new capability occurred on June 18, 1944, when Major Ree Turner of the 356th Fighter Squadron successfully shot down a V-1 flying bomb. He accomplished this by skillfully tipping the wing of the V-1 with the wingtip of his P-51 Mustang, a maneuver that required exceptional precision and speed. This technique involved positioning the fighter's wing tip within approximately 6 inches of the V-1's wing surface, then exploiting airflow to cause the flying bomb to roll off course and ultimately crash. This method, which demonstrated the remarkable performance improvements afforded by the 150 grade fuel, was executed at least 16 times throughout the campaign, highlighting its effectiveness and the growing prowess of the Allied fighters. The execution of this maneuver was no trivial task. It demanded not only precise timing but also extraordinary speed to position the wingtip accurately without missing the target. The pilot needed to be in perfect control of the aircraft, maintaining the necessary velocity to close the distance rapidly, and then perform the delicate wingtip contact maneuver. When successful, it allowed fighters to take down the V-1s without exposing themselves to the destructive blast of the bomb's engine or warhead, significantly increasing the Allies' ability to neutralize this threat. The widespread combat use of the 150 grade fuel by American P-51 pilots coincided with the Normandy invasion in June 1944. During this period, fighter groups from the 8th Air Force, tasked with establishing and maintaining air superiority over the invasion beaches, conducted combat air patrols and provided escort for bombers en route to targets deep within occupied Europe. These operations were crucial in shaping the air war, and the enhanced performance of the fighters fueled by the new fuel was a game-changer. German fighter pilots, engaged in their own desperate efforts to defend occupied territories and counter the Allied air offensive, began to report encounters with Mustangs that seemingly defied their previous understanding of aerial combat capabilities. They documented instances where American fighters performed beyond the limits they had come to expect, exhibiting speeds and maneuverability that were previously unthinkable. Luftwaffe intelligence officers collected and analyzed pilot reports describing how these American fighters often appeared to be able to accelerate away from German interceptors with remarkable ease, seemingly possessing hidden power reserves that defied explanation. Initially, these reports were met with skepticism and dismissed as the result of pilot fatigue or exaggeration. Many German fighters, overwhelmed by losses, fatigue, and the formidable Allied numbers, doubted the veracity of such claims. They attributed the observations to stress-induced misperceptions during subsequent test flights. American fighter aircraft such as the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning were meticulously examined, revealing notable insights into their performance capabilities. Among these, the Mustang stood out prominently, leaving a lasting impression on all who observed its flight. Test pilots and engineers alike were particularly struck by its remarkable speed, its impressive ability to climb rapidly, and its exceptional performance at high altitudes. These attributes made the P-51 Mustang a formidable adversary and an invaluable asset in the skies over Europe. However, what many German pilots and other adversaries failed to realize during combat encounters was the true extent of the aircraft's performance. Beneath its seemingly standard exterior, the Mustang had been pushed beyond its original design limits through the use of chemically enhanced fuel and innovative operational techniques. Its engines were being run at power settings that the initial engineers of the aircraft and its engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, produced under license by the Packard Company, had never envisioned when designing the aircraft. The Merlin engine, a marvel of engineering in itself, was carefully crafted with specific thermal boundaries, bearing load capacities, and detonation margins in mind, all to ensure reliable operation under normal conditions. When pilots operated their engines at higher boost pressures, far greater than originally intended, they approached the very limits of the engine's durability and safety margins. The breakthrough came with the introduction of what was known as 150 grade fuel, a type of aviation gasoline with a high lead content that proved revolutionary. This fuel allowed the engines to sustain these extreme power settings without experiencing catastrophic detonation, a form of engine knocking that could lead to severe engine damage or failure, something that lower-grade fuels could not prevent at similar boost pressures. The chemistry behind this remarkable capability involved a complex interplay of fuel molecules, air, heat, and pressure within the engine's combustion chamber. Tetraethyl lead, the primary anti-knock additive, played a crucial role by interfering with the chemical chain reactions responsible for spontaneous ignition. Essentially, it acted as a suppressor that prevented premature detonation, thereby enabling the engine to operate at higher performance levels safely. Nevertheless, this advancement was not without significant trade-offs. The use of tetraethyl lead was inherently toxic, necessitating meticulous handling procedures by ground crews to prevent poisoning and environmental contamination. Furthermore, this additive left deposits on critical engine components such as spark plugs, valves, and cylinder walls, which accelerated engine wear and increased maintenance requirements. The high lead content in 150 grade fuel was particularly problematic. It hastened the fouling of spark plugs and led to more frequent cylinder inspections and replacements, thereby complicating the maintenance routines. American maintenance personnel swiftly adapted to these new demands. Replacement intervals for spark plugs were shortened, and cylinder inspections became more routine. Additionally, the schedules for engine overhauls were adjusted to account for the increased wear and deposits. Although these measures introduced additional logistical challenges, the significant gains in aircraft performance, such as increased speed, altitude, and combat effectiveness, were considered well worth the extra maintenance efforts. Transitioning to the use of 150 grade fuel also necessitated adjustments in pilot operating procedures. Pilots had to learn to push their engines to higher manifold pressure limits, which translated into increased power output. However, this also meant that they needed to exercise greater caution to avoid overboosting, especially at lower altitudes where the denser air could cause engine stress or damage. Managing fuel consumption became a critical skill, as the higher performance came at the cost of significantly increased fuel burn. Running engines at maximum boost could rapidly deplete fuel reserves, which posed a serious challenge during long escort missions, such as those to Berlin and back, where range was already stretched to its limits. To fully harness the potential of the new fuel, pilots had to master careful fuel management techniques, balancing the need for maximum power during combat with the necessity of conserving fuel during cruise phases. They learned when to throttle back and when to apply full power, optimizing both performance and range. Reports from combat missions during the summer and fall of 1944 vividly document this transformation, illustrating how the aircraft's capabilities were fundamentally enhanced. The impact was especially evident in the improved effectiveness of American fighter groups within the 8th Air Force. Equipped with the advanced fuel, these units reported higher victory-to-loss ratios and demonstrated a markedly increased ability to intercept and engage German fighters attempting to attack formations of bombers. German fighters, which had previously relied on swift slashing attacks followed by quick escapes, found themselves increasingly unable to outrun the more powerful and agile Mustangs. The use of high-grade fuel and the resulting performance improvements contributed significantly to the shifting balance of air superiority during this period. For instance, on 6 August in 1944, Lieutenant Hollis Bud Neylan, whose actions and exploits epitomized the heightened combat effectiveness, embarked on a mission that exemplified the transformative effect of this technological and tactical advancement. The details of his engagements and the broader implications of the upgraded aircraft performance underscore the pivotal role played by the enhanced fuel the 357th Fighter Group, operating as part of the daring Operation Frantic missions that aimed to provide aerial support to Soviet air bases behind enemy lines, faced intense encounters with German fighters over Eastern Europe. During one such engagement, a pilot named Neylan was flying his iconic P-51 Mustang, affectionately nicknamed Hell's Bells, and was fueled with a mixture of 150-grade aviation gasoline, a high-performance fuel that would play a critical role in what followed. While patrolling the skies, Neylan spotted a German Messerschmitt Bf 109, flown by a pilot known as Gauss Schack. As the combat unfolded, Neylan's aircraft advantage in speed became clearly evident. He closed the distance rapidly, maneuvering with precision and firing a well-aimed burst of machine gun fire that struck the German fighter's cooling system, causing damage that hampered its performance. Despite the intense dogfight, Neylan's superior speed and tactics allowed him to maintain the advantage, forcing Schack to make a difficult decision. Running low on fuel and ammunition after the fierce exchange, Neylan chose to break off the pursuit rather than press his advantage further. In a gesture of sportsmanship and perhaps recognition of the adversary's skill, he waved to Schack before heading back to fulfill his escort duties. Schack was able to skillfully belly land his damaged aircraft near German lines, but the incident left him pondering for decades about the outcome. For 40 years, Schack wondered why the American pilot had not taken the final step to eliminate him, unaware that Neylan believed he had only inflicted damage rather than delivering a decisive kill. Years later, as history specialists pieced together the stories from both pilots and arranged a reunion in Germany, Schack was finally able to confirm that the American Mustang's performance had exceeded anything he had previously encountered in combat. The speed at which Neylan had closed the gap, combined with the remarkable reserves of power evident during the engagement, had marked a significant departure from previous encounters with American fighters. Schack's acknowledgement underscored the extraordinary capabilities of the P-51 Mustang, which had become a symbol of Allied air superiority. The psychological impact of such encounters on Luftwaffe pilots was profound and far-reaching. Already overwhelmed by numerical disadvantages and facing the daunting challenge of confronting the more numerous and well-equipped Allied air forces, German pilots now faced aircraft that seemed to possess virtually limitless performance margins. The once diverse tactical options available to them rapidly diminished. They could attempt large-scale mass attacks, relying on numbers to try to overpower the escorts and the defending fighters. Alternatively, they might choose to avoid combat altogether, conserving their aircraft and pilots for future engagements. However, engaging the Mustangs often proved to be a perilous decision, as these aircraft were faster, more agile, and flown by pilots who grew increasingly confident and aggressive with each encounter. This mounting pressure reached a strategic tipping point in the mind of Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe. Upon witnessing the unprecedented presence of P-51 Mustangs over Berlin, Göring famously declared that the war was effectively lost. His statement reflected the grim reality faced by German strategists. The long-range capabilities of the Mustangs meant that no corner of Germany was safe from American daylight bombing raids. This introduced a new, insidious layer to the Luftwaffe's strategic dilemma, an inability to shield German cities and military targets from the relentless reach of Allied fighters and bombers. The situation worsened in mid-1944 with the introduction of superior fuel designed specifically for high-performance aircraft. The Germans, seeking to counteract the Allies' technological advantage, managed to obtain samples of the high-grade aviation gasoline, known as 150 grade, that the Allies used, through captures of drop tanks or wrecked aircraft. German chemical engineers analyzed these samples and confirmed a troubling truth. The American developers had succeeded in producing aviation gasoline with performance characteristics far beyond what German synthetic fuel plants could manufacture. While some German sources later claimed that the late-war C3 fuel approached the performance of the 150 grade, actual production remained limited and inconsistent in quality. Allied strategic bombing campaigns targeting German synthetic fuel facilities, especially the major plants at Leuna and other key sites during May and June of 1944, further crippled Germany's ability to produce high-quality aviation fuel. These attacks aimed to choke off the fuel supply critical to the German war effort. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was forced to ration its precious fuel supplies carefully. Fighter units received priority, yet even these units faced severe operational constraints. The shortage meant that pilot training was severely curtailed, impacting the readiness of new pilots entering combat. Many German airmen found themselves flying under tighter restrictions, which diminished their ability to effectively train and prepare for combat missions. The shortage of high-quality fuel and the resulting operational limitations signaled a clear decline in the Luftwaffe's capacity to contest the skies effectively as the war drew towards its final stages. During the early stages of the Allied air campaign, it became evident that many American pilots were entering combat zones with comparatively limited flying experience. Unlike their German counterparts, who often arrived with hundreds of hours accumulated in training and combat preparation, American pilots typically had only a fraction of that experience when they first took to the skies in operational units. This disparity in training hours reflected different approaches to pilot preparation and the logistical realities faced by the respective forces. From the beginning of the year 2044 until the middle of May, a period marked by significant logistical and technological developments, American bomber crews endured a steady rate of losses that ranged from about 3 to 6% per mission. These figures, while tragic and representing a considerable attrition, could be deemed sustainable within the broader context of strategic bombing campaigns. The losses, although painful, were manageable and served as a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers of aerial warfare at that time. However, following the widespread deployment of the new 150 grade fuel and the achievement of consolidated air superiority over the European theater, the situation improved markedly. Between June and December of the same year, the loss rates for American bombers fell to below 2% per mission, signaling a significant enhancement in operational safety and effectiveness. This reduction was not solely attributable to the fuel upgrade, it was also a consequence of gaining control of the skies, which allowed for safer navigation and attack runs, as well as more confident defense against enemy fighters. Concurrent with these improvements, American P-51 Mustang fighter groups, operating under the banners of the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Forces, reported a dramatic surge in their success rates. Over the course of approximately 1.5 years, spanning late 1943 to May 1945, These fighter units claimed the destruction of roughly 4,950 German aircraft in air-to-air combat. A substantial portion of these victories occurred after June 1944, highlighting how the advent of superior tactics, technology, and fuel contributed to an increasingly effective aerial offensive. At the same time, the German Luftwaffe, which had entered 1944 with a considerable amount of combat experience, despite suffering heavy losses earlier in the Eastern Front, began to face a systematic and relentless attrition of its skilled pilots. The attrition was so severe that by mid-1944, the once formidable German pilot force had been significantly depleted, eroding its capacity to mount effective defensive or offensive operations. By the time of the Normandy invasion on D-Day, June 6, 1944, the German air presence over the beaches had dwindled dramatically. Reports indicated that only 2 Luftwaffe aircraft appeared in the skies over the Normandy landing zones, a stark contrast to the large fleets that had previously operated in the region. Although the Luftwaffe still retained thousands of fighters, their operational potential was severely hampered by shortages of fuel, a diminished pool of trained pilots, and a lack of tactical flexibility. These limitations prevented the Germans from deploying their remaining aircraft with the effectiveness needed to challenge the Allied air superiority. A critical aspect of the Allied technological advancement during this period was the introduction of the new 150 grade fuel, which required careful analysis of its technical specifications. This fuel was distinguished by its high octane rating of 100 when measured against pure iso-octane, which meant it had a strong resistance to engine detonation, even under cruising conditions. Such a property was crucial for maintaining engine reliability and efficiency at sustained, moderate power levels. Furthermore, the 150 grade fuel's rich mixture performance number of 150 indicated that engines could safely withstand 50% more compression than pure iso-octane when operating at maximum power settings. This high compression capacity allowed aircraft engines to achieve optimal performance during long-range cruise phases, maximizing fuel efficiency and range, while enabling pilots to switch to richer fuel mixtures during combat, where increased power was necessary for dogfights or evasive maneuvers. Operational procedures for handling this advanced fuel required meticulous precautions due to its high tetraethyl content, which posed safety hazards. Ground crews were equipped with protective gear when fueling aircraft, and any spills were promptly cleaned to prevent lead poisoning. Fuel trucks and storage tanks were distinctly marked to prevent accidental mixing of different fuel grades, thereby safeguarding engine performance and crew health. Despite these safety protocols, the overall record remained commendably safe, with industrial accidents being rare occurrences. Transitioning to the new fuel grade in operational squadrons necessitated comprehensive pilot training. Pilots received detailed briefings about the physical and chemical properties of the fuel, along with updated engine operating procedures that included higher manifold pressure limits. Operational guidelines clarified when and how to employ maximum power settings, ensuring pilots could adapt to the new fuel's characteristics without risking engine damage. Fortunately, the aircraft themselves required no structural modifications to accommodate the new fuel. All engines, fuel systems, and related components were fully compatible with both the previous and new grades, which greatly simplified the logistics of supply and operational management. This compatibility facilitated a smoother transition and ensured that operational readiness was maintained without the presence of toxic tetraethyl lead in aviation fuel. The meticulous processes involved in ensuring its quality through rigorous control testing, the careful transportation logistics to European airbases, the secure storage in fortified facilities, and the subsequent distribution to dozens of airfields all highlight the complex and highly coordinated efforts that underpinned the Allied air campaign during the latter stages of World War II. The industrial might of the United States in 1944 was nothing short of extraordinary. It seemed almost miraculous in its scale and efficiency. Factories across the nation churned out aircraft at an unprecedented rate, producing thousands of bombers that could be deployed in strategic bombing campaigns, tens of thousands of fighters ready to engage in aerial combat, and shipyards launched Liberty ships at a pace that left German U-boats struggling to keep up with their sinking. The refining industry operated at full throttle, producing aviation gasoline in quantities that vastly exceeded Germany's total fuel output across all grades combined. This impressive level of industrial output was the result of decades of deliberate development in manufacturing, a wealth of natural resources, such as coal, oil, and metals, and a homeland that was well protected from enemy bombing raids, allowing factories to operate unimpeded. The wartime workforce was a massive and diverse force, including millions of women who stepped into factory jobs, breaking traditional gender roles to support the war effort through their labor. The Royal Air Force, meanwhile, made extensive use of a high-octane fuel classified as Grade 150 in fighter operations across the European theater. British squadrons flying aircraft such as the Spitfire Mark 14, Tempest V, and Mustang Mark III and IV received priority access to this advanced fuel. RAF pilots reported performance improvements comparable to those documented by their American counterparts, confirming the significant advantage conferred by this superior fuel. The Tempest, already renowned as one of the fastest piston engine fighters in service, became even more formidable with the new fuel, its capabilities enhanced further. The Tempest fighters proved particularly effective against the V-1 flying bombs, which had become a terror weapon in late 1944. Between June and September of that year, RAF's 150-wing Tempest squadrons shot down an astonishing 638 V-1s, with the 3rd Squadron alone claiming over 305. Squadron leader Joseph Bry distinguished himself by shooting down 59 of these deadly flying bombs. Likewise, Belgian squadron leader Remy van Leerde destroyed 44, and wing commander Roland Bymont accounted for 31. The Mosquito fighter bomber, Spitfire Mark 14, and Mustang Mark III and IV fighters also contributed significantly, with victories totaling 623, 303, and 232 respectively. The clear performance margin provided by the high-grade fuel proved invaluable across multiple roles and missions. The combat effectiveness of the Grade 150 fuel was repeatedly demonstrated throughout late 1944 and early 1945. Fighter groups that had access to this advanced fuel reported not only increased numbers of enemy aircraft shot down but also reduced their own losses. By March of 1945, nearly every P-51 Mustang squadron had transitioned to using this fuel, underscoring its importance. Operational reports from this period overwhelmingly reveal one-sided aerial encounters. German fighters seldom challenged the attacking Allied formations with any degree of effectiveness. When they did engage, they typically suffered severe losses, often unable to withstand the speed, agility, and firepower of the Allied fighters powered by Grade 150 gasoline. By April of the same year, missions over Germany frequently encountered no aerial opposition at all, as the Luftwaffe had been effectively neutralized, destroyed through relentless attrition, fuel shortages, and the systematic elimination of seasoned pilots who could no longer be replaced. Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945, marked the definitive end of the European air war. The Allies achieved absolute air supremacy, a dominance that had multiple roots. The long-range capability of the P-51 Mustang, which was greatly enhanced by the superior fuel, played a crucial role. American pilot training programs had become exemplary, producing pilots capable of exploiting every advantage offered by their aircraft and equipment. The Allied forces' numerical superiority was overwhelming, and their industrial and technological edge, embodied by the high-performance, high-octane fuel, proved to be decisive. The deep, rich purple dye in the gasoline was more than a simple cosmetic. It symbolized the transformation of regular fighters into extraordinary combat machines. It bolstered the confidence of Allied pilots, enabling them to perform with greater daring and effectiveness. This fuel represented the culmination of years of technological innovation and industrial strength, showcasing the ability of these nations to outproduce, outthink, and ultimately outlast their enemies. In aerial combat, speed is a fundamental advantage. A faster fighter has the ability to select its engagement, dictate the terms of the encounter, and retreat or strike at will. The superior fuel and the aircraft it powered translated into the ongoing battle in the skies was a complex dance of tactics, speed, and resource management, where understanding precisely when to press an attack and when to retreat could mean the difference between victory and defeat. A fighter aircraft that possessed greater speed and agility offered its pilot a significant tactical advantage, providing the flexibility needed to choose optimal moments for engagement or withdrawal. When American fighters managed to attain a clear edge in speed through a combination of innovative airframe design and a plentiful, high-quality fuel supply, the tactical landscape for their adversaries, particularly the Luftwaffe, shifted dramatically. This shift was not just a matter of technical superiority but fundamentally altered the strategic options available to both sides. The contrast between the Allied and German situations in the closing years of the war, specifically late 1944 and early 1945, became strikingly evident. For Allied fighters, the ability to undertake multiple combat missions each day was a standard operational practice. Their pilots could, with relatively minimal concern for resource depletion, fly several sorties in a single day, limited mainly by factors such as pilot fatigue and the need for aircraft maintenance. These aircraft, supported by an extensive logistical network, were consistently fueled and ready to respond swiftly to any emerging threat. In stark contrast, German fighters often faced severe logistical constraints, most notably, shortages of fuel, which kept many of their aircraft grounded for extended periods. When they did take to the skies, they operated under strict fuel conservation protocols, which imposed significant limitations on their combat effectiveness. These measures meant that Luftwaffe pilots had to be extremely judicious about their fuel use, often choosing their engagement moments very carefully, knowing that a misjudgment could leave them stranded far from base. The risks for German pilots extended beyond the dangers of enemy fire. A single mistake involving excessive fuel consumption during combat could leave them with insufficient reserves to make the return trip. Conversely, Allied pilots, armed with ample fuel supplies, were free to employ their aircraft's full power whenever necessary, confident that they could safely return home after a sortie. This operational flexibility was not just a logistical convenience, it carried profound strategic weight. It allowed Allied fighters to maintain continuous patrols, respond aggressively to threats, and sustain relentless pressure on German forces. They could pursue targets with confidence, knowing their fuel reserves were sufficient for multiple engagements and safe return. German fighters, on the other hand, had to operate under a more constrained mindset. They often had to choose the timing of their attacks carefully, balancing the potential for success against the risk of fuel depletion. Many Luftwaffe sorties ended prematurely, not because the pilots were being overwhelmed or shot down, but because they ran out of fuel. This reality meant that every mission could be potentially their last, not solely due to the threat of enemy action but because of the simple, yet critical, shortage of the vital resource: fuel. In stark contrast, Allied pilots flew with a confidence rooted in material superiority. Their aircraft were faster, their fuel supplies more abundant, and their logistical infrastructure more robust and well organized. This combination of advantages allowed them to adopt more aggressive tactics, increase the frequency of their missions, and achieve better combat outcomes. Higher survival rates among Allied pilots were a direct consequence of this strategic edge, which was itself rooted in the industrial and chemical capacity supporting their war effort. The story of the 150-octane fuel, therefore, is a compelling narrative about the importance of industrial strength in modern warfare. Victory was not merely about producing more aircraft. It was about producing better, more efficient aircraft capable of outperforming the enemy's best efforts. It was about supplying those aircraft with fuel of superior quality, more energy-rich and more reliable than anything the Germans could sustain. It was also about cultivating a surplus of highly trained pilots, supported by an industrial base capable of replacing losses at a rate that the Germans simply could not match. Behind the scenes, American and British scientists, fuel chemists working tirelessly in laboratories, refineries, and production facilities, never set foot in the combat zones across Germany's defenses. They never faced enemy fighters or anti-aircraft fire. Yet, their meticulous efforts in chemical engineering, optimizing manifold pressure, and refining crude oil into high-octane fuel played a decisive role in shaping the outcome of aerial combat in 1944 and 1945. Every time a P-51 Mustang pilot advanced his throttle and felt the surge of power that Germany's fighters could not emulate, he was benefiting from the fruits of this scientific and industrial innovation. German planners had initially assumed that American fighters would perform within predictable limits, dictated primarily by aircraft design and standard fuel capabilities. They relied on the expectation that fuel consumption would follow these known parameters, allowing them to anticipate the endurance and performance of Allied aircraft. However, what they encountered instead was a revolutionary leap in performance, driven by fuel that was not just adequate but superior, far exceeding their expectations. The industrial capacity of the United States, with its vast and sophisticated fuel production infrastructure, created a supply of high-grade fuel that could sustain the exceptional performance characteristics of their fighters for longer durations and at higher as the Allied armies advanced relentlessly from both the eastern and western fronts. The once formidable Luftwaffe had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, losing coherence as an effective fighting force. Although a handful of German units continued to operate aviation assets, they did so under increasingly dire circumstances, often with only enough fuel remaining for a single sortie before being forced to retreat or cease operations altogether. The emergence of jet fighters such as the Messerschmitt Me 262 marked a significant technological breakthrough, representing the cutting edge of aircraft design and performance. However, these advanced fighters arrived too late in the conflict and in insufficient numbers to alter the course of the air war significantly. Their deployment was further hampered by critical shortages of fuel, which limited their operational availability, and by the lack of experienced pilots, many of whom had been systematically lost in previous combat engagements, leaving the Luftwaffe unable to fully leverage these technological innovations. When the final tally of the air campaign is examined, it clearly reflects the cumulative impact of the overwhelming advantages held by the Allies. American P-51 fighter groups, operating across multiple theaters of war, conducted hundreds of thousands of sorties. These sorties resulted in the claimed destruction of approximately 4,950 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, alongside the destruction of over 4,131 aircraft on the ground, whether in hangars, airfields, or during strafing runs. These figures are more than mere statistics. They symbolize the loss of skilled pilots, the draining away of combat experience, and the systematic wasting of German industrial resources. Resources that could have been used to produce aircraft, pilots, and equipment but were instead destroyed before they could contribute to a strategic victory. While the availability of high-grade aviation fuel, specifically the 150-grade octane gasoline, was not solely responsible for the outcome of the air war, it was undeniably a significant factor that tipped the scales. This superior fuel provided the margin of operational superiority that distinguished mere parity from dominance. The ability of a properly boosted P-51 Mustang to reach speeds of up to approximately 448 miles per hour was not merely a matter of velocity. It was a testament to technological progress, superior industrial capacity, and advanced engineering. Such performance figures represented a level of tactical and strategic advantage that German planners had failed to foresee or counter. This realization underscored that the innovations in fuel chemistry, crafted by American chemists and petroleum engineers working far from the chaos of the battlefield, had become as critical as any gun or bomb in the arsenal. The simple act of dyeing gasoline purple was more than cosmetic. It symbolized a new era of fuel technology that could influence aerial combat just as much as tactics or pilot skill. The key to establishing air supremacy over Europe in the year of 1945 was rooted in the intricate details of piston engine compression ratios, the anti-NOx properties of aromatic hydrocarbons, and the performance metrics of aviation fuels that surpassed anything Germany could produce domestically. The P-51 Mustangs that soared over Berlin in the early months of 1944 were already exceptional aircraft, renowned for their speed, agility, and reliability. Yet, by early 1945, these same aircraft were powered by a different kind of fuel that elevated their performance to new heights. This fuel enabled the Mustangs to fly faster, punch through defenses more effectively, and engage in combat with a level of effectiveness that was previously unattainable. The differences, measured in octane ratings, manifold pressure readings, and airspeed indicators, were not merely technical specifications, they became decisive factors in the air war. These advantages contributed fundamentally to the outcome, determining who would ultimately control the skies over Europe. In the grand scheme of the conflict, this difference in fuel quality and aircraft performance encapsulated the broader victory of Allied industrial might. It was a victory expressed not only through the destruction of enemy aircraft and infrastructure but also through the precise engineering of a purple liquid, refined, tested, and optimized, that fueled the engines of victory. This specialized fuel, when burned in powerful engines, transformed into an invisible but potent weapon, helping secure the fate of Nazi Germany and shaping the outcome of the European theater, one combat sortie at a time.